I made this neat pirate game for the Global Game Jam this year. If you're not familiar with the Global Game Jam, the goal is to make a game in 48 hours based on a theme. Given the global situation, they decided to do an online version, which expanded the time from 2 days to 5 days. I made sure my weekend was cleared for the jam, but I decided not to take any time off, so I really only managed to scrape together a few extra hours on Thursday. The theme for this year's jam was Lost and Found. The first idea that came to mind was pirates digging up buried treasure. Without a team to talk with, this is the idea I decided upon. I've done a few other jams, and this is not what typically happens. Last year, we started a Towerfall game before turning it into a VR spider simulator. In another jam, it wasn't until the second day that we came up with the concept and made Twitch Plays Tamagotchi. In person, I could typically find other like-minded individuals to bounce ideas around, but the online nature of this year meant that just didn't happen. I had to go with something I could make solo. Recently, I made a 3D version of Block Dude, so my mind immediately went to Voxels to implement digging up treasure. I also knew it was within my ability to create. For the full game loop, I wanted to lean into the theme and force the player to start off lost and use their map to triangulate their location. They would then sail to the X on the map and dig up the island to see if they could find the treasure. For development tools in this project, I used Unity and Visual Studio for game development, Magica Voxel for models, and Piskel for pixel art menu elements. Day 1. I only had a few hours on Thursday night to get started on the project. The first thing I started on was making the terrain blocks in Magica Voxel. Taking Minecraft as an inspiration, I made sand, dirt, and rock blocks. I've done a lot of pixel art and narrowed down a certain character style. I tried remaking that style in Voxels for a different project recently, and it proved the perfect jumping off point for the game jam. Subconsciously, I had Mr. Smee in my head when creating the character, which I then turned into a striped onesie look. I didn't really intend for the character to be the final look, but I never went back to update it. After getting the art settled, I started the process of scalping a bunch of code from my Block Dude 3D project. It includes a faux 3D tile map, and I was hoping to get someone doing some level design for islands, but that didn't happen. I made a really quick water effect with a transparent plane, then ended the day by spending too long trying to get a day-night cycle lined up with the light and the camera background. As a veteran of many game jams, I knew a good night's sleep is really the best option, and went to bed on time. Day 2. The second evening of work, I got the basic mechanics working. The first thing I started with was the world map. To create the map, I just pointed a camera down on the world and moved the viewpoint into the corner of the screen. After the map, I added player movement. For animation, I just made the model wobble around. I added floating to the water by simply reversing gravity at a certain height. I ended the evening by making a little shovel and a simple animation to go along with it. To add digging, I simply added a trigger in front of the player to destroy any dirt when the dig button was pressed. Day 3. Saturday was my main bulk of work. The first task I tackled was getting menus implemented. I created some sprites for the menu buttons. I spent a little while trying to add details to the buttons before settling on a simple design. Getting the main menu and pause menus up was a nice victory to start off the morning with. I had to redo the digging so it was more animation-based than trigger-based, so the full shovel animation would be seen. Then I started the difficult task of island generation. The first island generation I started with was a snake method that moves from block to block in a random direction. Not only did this not generate good islands, but the overlapping blocks caused lots of collision issues. I did manage to spawn the right blocks at the right height, though. The second method I tried was using the snake method as a base layer, and then adding each layer on top of that. This was a little more refined, but ended up with a lot of weird towers. Eventually, the method I settled on was spawning blocks using Unity's inside unit circle method. To make the layers fit on each other, I shrink the radius based on the height of the layer. I forgot to record the second half of the day, but that's probably for the best with all the cursing I did. The first problem I ran into was getting climbing implemented. I wanted to keep the controls simple so you just move into a block to climb it, but it just wasn't happening. Eventually, I settled on a method where a trigger around the player simply boosts them up when they get near blocks. It's a little clunky when exploring the edge of an island, but I like the fact that I didn't have to add any extra buttons to create the effect. The other reason I spent the evening cursing was trying to refine the island generation so I could spawn a few different islands without the application lagging out. The big issue was islands spawning on top of each other. I tried for a while to make sure blocks wouldn't spawn if there was something in the way, but it refused to work. Instead, I add a check in the block where it eliminates itself if it collides with a block from a newer island. I ended the day by making a pirate ship and a treasure chest. I added a simple opening animation and a light to the chest as well. To make the treasure chest visible on the map, I added a giant red X high in the sky above it. I ended the day pretty frustrated with the process, but happy with the progress. Day 4. The final day. I started by getting the treasure chest to spawn inside of an island, instead of out in the ocean somewhere. Next, I threw together a map icon so the player could toggle out a full screen map. The reason everything is so tiny is so the player isn't visible on the map, which would ruin the whole lost and found thing. I added a win screen when opening the chest and called the gameplay done for an initial build. For audio, I downloaded stuff from Zapsplat for an ocean sound effect and a digging sound effect. The yay at the end I pulled from a previous Game Jam project. With the first version done, I added some more fun features. I implemented the title screen ship into the gameplay by having a button to switch to the ship before I realized that I could trigger the model swap by simply checking if the player was on the ground or swimming. To make the ship form a little more useful, I also increased the move speed. Once I got the ship and the pirate properly switching out, I was kinda running out of things I wanted to add. I created a simple instruction screen by adding a giant button with some controls on it. To accentuate the voxels, I added a particle effect to the digging. It took me a while to tweak before I got it to a place where I wanted it. Again, I forgot to record the latter half of the day, but just making builds is kind of boring anyway. The first feature I added after lunch was touchscreen controls that I tested on my Android phone for a while. I ended the jam by playing around with lighting. I randomized the start rotation of the light, and then swap out the camera color accordingly. The last thing I added for weather was a giant particle effect for the rain. I somehow still had some time left, so I created a palm tree model that I attached to the sand blocks that has a 1 in 100 chance of showing up. The deadline came up, so I finally stopped tweaking the thing and submitted it. So how do I feel about this project? Honestly, I'm really happy with this project. I managed to stick with the first idea I came up with, and stick with it all the way to the end. I'm really proud of the fact that I managed to go from idea to implementation with very few hiccups. The voxel art is a bit shabby, but I feel like everything in the game is recognizable as what it's supposed to be. I kinda regret messing around with the lighting a lot at the end, because it comes up with a night scene a bit too frequently, and I didn't get the scene properly lit for that scenario. As for the main mechanic of triangulating your position, I find it pretty fun. It helps that the treasure is buried most of the time, so you won't know if you're right until you dig up the treasure. After making this, someone did a very generous half-an-hour long Let's Play of the game. I was a little concerned at the start of the video that I made the game a little obtuse, but the player managed to figure out the game and get the exact experience I wanted from it. It felt incredibly validating to watch someone have the exact experience that I wanted to give them with the game. I'm a little bummed I didn't add some extra treasure chests on other islands after watching them dig up the entire world. As for improvements, there's a few things I missed, but I don't think anything is game-breaking. The player can sail out of the map, but luckily the ocean keeps them from falling into the abyss. The waves get out of control, but I also heard it's fun to jump over the islands. The ship can also get stuck under the island and fly high into the sky, but I didn't really see any other big bugs in the game. As for the mechanic of triangulation, I'm not really sure how to expand it. Sure, I could increase island variability, but that wouldn't change the core gameplay. I'm happy with calling it quits on this project here, but leave me a comment if you want to see this idea expanded. To play the game for yourself, go check out my portfolio page for the game at ryanspeterson.com under Voxel Pirate. It will take you to your preferred indie game site, whether that's itch.io, GameJolt, or IndieDB. Find me on those sites under Ryan S. Peterson Games. Web versions are available on itch and GameJolt, with Android and PC builds available on all three. The source code is also available if you want to puzzle at the odd coding decisions I made. If you want to check out this stuff live, go to Ryan S. Peterson Games on Twitch. I want to get into streaming more, and hopefully this project is the start of that. For social media, you can find me on Twitter under RS Peterson Games, and Ryan S. Peterson Games on Instagram and Facebook. Right now, the accounts are a lot of pixel art, but I put all my development news on there too. Lastly, I have a Patreon you can throw money at. The main game I'm developing is a multiplayer character creation game called Altercation. Patreon also helps me fund videos like this. I plan to do a tutorial series on the prototype for Black Dude 3D, so stick around for that. If you made it this far, thank you so much for watching, and have fun sleeping!